All Things Alice. This podcast will explore the cultural phenomenon of Alice in Wonderland as artistic landmark and global symbol of inspiration and imagination. I'm your host, Frank Beddor, the author of the Looking Glass Wars trilogy. Let's explore, what is it about Alice? Welcome back to the show, everybody. This week, we're joined once again by a very good friend of mine and a super talented writer, Curtis Clark, my collaborator on Crossfire and Underfire. We're going to dive into his start in Hollywood and specifically one of the scripts that he wrote that launched his career and All Things Alice. Hey, Curtis, welcome back. I gotta say that our last conversation was so stellar that I really wanted to have you back. And I appreciate you carving out some time between being a writer. And to jump off on that, you wrote a script called Run, which you've written a lot of scripts, and we've all written a lot that's still in a drawer somewhere, thank God. But Run was a really great calling card for you. Why don't you tell listeners what that script, how that worked for you and why it was kind of a door opener.
So I was always looking for somebody when I was young to try to give me some guideposts when it comes to writing. That's why part of the reason why I wrote that blog post for you was like, if a young writer happens along it, they can see sort of like what happened in my career. So I'll tell it from that perspective of like starting out. I had written some stuff that wasn't great. I'd written some stuff that was okay. I'd gotten some jobs and I just worked my butt off, but I didn't have that great sample. And I was working with this guy named Parent Childs. He was a producer, and I had this TV show that I wrote for him. I wrote it, but we created together called City of Gods. I think you read that. It was the modern retelling of Greek mythology.
It's terrific.
It was dense though, and it was really work for me. Like if I was to look at it now, I'd be like, oh my God.
It was long, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was long, and it wasn't great. But it was the idea was there, like the passion and the possibility and all that was there. The execution wasn't very good. And I was getting by on work ethic and passion and things like that, and then just failing, right? So I needed something that was professional. That's what I really needed. And so that script became I needed a business card. I was like, this has to tick all of the boxes. So I read as many science fiction features as I could find. I read, at that time it was like Inception, and I was reading this. There was this spec called Agent Ox that I read, and a bunch of other ones. And I was like, this is going to look exactly like those do. That's what I did on the page. And sure enough, that ended up being the script that got me my rep. That is the script that got me working with some larger people out here. So I started my partnership with the actor Oded Fair when we did some television stuff together. I think you met him at a con one time. He's a great guy. He's like one of the nicest people that I've ever met in Hollywood. He's really creative and had a great time with him. Never would have happened had I not written this particular script. The funny thing about it is it's never gone to buyers. So it's still like around. I polished it not that long ago and cut like 20 pages out of it because I'm better technically now. But it was a very simple idea. It was about two androids on the run with their 7-year-old daughter who doesn't know her parents aren't human. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's the movie. It's right. It's a movie, it's sci-fi, but it's a family movie. It's a 4-quadrant film. It's PG-13. It works internationally. Yada yada yada. And I got close with it one time. One time, a person who had a deal at Fox wanted Fox to buy it for them, but there was a competing project. Anyways, I got kind of off kilter there for a second. But basically, I took like 6 months and I did all the things you're supposed to do correctly this time. I did them all in order. I broke it all correctly. I did every single step through every single screenwriting book that I could find. And then after that, I never read those books ever again because I took what I wanted to take from them and I made it my own. And that was what that script was. And it's still a good sample, but I've moved beyond it in terms of being a writer.
Right. And you've also had to learn that instead of writing all these things on spec, the art of pitching, so you can take that next idea now that you have some doors to knock on and some folks to talk to.
And that's what I've been doing in the last couple of years. I spec that crime drama because I want to direct it and I want to make it as an independent. But otherwise, I've pretty much only been pitching, which, to fold back into you, when I first became a writer, I didn't even think about that. Like, I'm not a performer. And then I go to San Diego Comic-Con with you, and I'm watching you drop into this like well-polished pitch with strangers who are just walking up to your booth, and you are just, in 15 seconds, they know what the world is. And I was like, well, shit. Now I got to learn how to do that. And you have a background in acting and performing. I do not. And so when we do pitches now, when I pitched, this will bring us up to speed now a little bit. I was pitching Amazon the day the strike happened.
Okay.
And so what we were doing it over Zoom. And so I would prefer, just my personality, to go in a room and shoot the shit like you and I are now. Find something, riff back and forth, get excited, get the notes, get out and go to town. That's not the way it is anymore. Yeah. And so you got to get in there. And before you get in the room, you feel the energy in the room. You try to get them asking you questions. Now it's over Zoom. They're on mute. They're going to sit there for 30 minutes, nod their head, and you're going to hope they're not reading their email. It sucks, but you have to do it.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to connect personally because of the lack of close, proximity to each other and feeling that transference of energy that goes back and forth in a pitch, and especially when it starts going well and you're building that kind of momentum. I
had the last two pitches were the exact opposite. The one with Fox, great. They asked a bunch of questions afterwards. We still don't know. Maybe they want to buy it, but the strike has happened. The Amazon one, dead on arrival. It was like one, because of the strike, and two, because it just wasn't going to be for them. But it was painful because I had to go through another 15, 20 minutes of this going like, they're not going to buy this shit.
When you know it's not working. And, on the day of the strike, you can't get any unluckier than like why they even kept that meeting is kind of surprising. But every meeting and every situation is so unique and different, and it's not knowable. It's like, you said being an actor and walking into a room and they said, oh, they want some middle-aged white guy. Okay, well, there's 15 people in there that can play that part. Why am I going to be the separate one? Different.
Yeah, and it's also that thing where the mandates that they send out, like my reps will send me, hey, they're looking for this, and that. By the time you get to them, they don't want that shit anymore.
No, they bought it the day that they put it out there.
Exactly. Yeah. And so honestly, like where I'm at now with the way that I do development, I don't even think about the market. You can't time the market. You're not going to be there when the market wants what it wants right now anyways. And so you're almost better off trying to develop what's not in the marketplace or what the market's not buying. Because by the time you're ready, literally could be a year or two from when you conceive this thing through packaging and all of that. Who knows what they're going to want? Everybody last buying season wanted Ted Lasso, right? Well, guess what? A bazillion Ted Lassos hit the market. So if you're going with Ted Lasso next year, you're dead. Like, it's just not going to happen.
But in 5 years, it might be perfect timing. So, your script run could fall right into place. It's not knowable. I've been working on this project, the Juliet, at Warner Brothers for so many years. I'm embarrassed to say how many.
That's Alfred Bester, right?
Yeah.
I know that. I read it, yeah.
Yeah, we keep reinventing it to try and catch the zeitgeist because we kept missing the curve. We're too late to the story, and the story and the genre passes us by. That happened to me with the World War II story that I sold to Paramount when I first started. And there were no World War II movies, and nobody was talking about World War II movies. And they said, oh, this is really a fresh, great idea. It was, Dirty Dozen on skis based on this true story, but we didn't get the story right. And then all these World War II movies.
Private Ryan, Band of Brothers.
One after another. And by the time they got around to reading the script after the fourth polish, they went, we're past it.
So I have a project right now that is a deep cover espionage story set within the alt-right. So it's already like tough subject matter, right? And it's a limited series because it's a limited series. The script is great. Like it's probably the best writing I've ever done. And the showrunners, Ethan and Cy, the guys I mentioned before, have said like, this is a really, really good writing sample. It hasn't left the shelf because the timing is not good, because January 6th is still in everybody's mindset and all that kind of stuff.
It's too close. It's too close. But afterwards,
the thing is, by the time it got made would be 2 or 3 years from now. So who knows? It's so tough that way. Yeah. And for me, it's the feeling with them is that it's such a strong sample that like, even if it doesn't sell, it's going to do good things for me. Well, I don't want to hear that when we're not able to send the script out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like so you're telling me I got this possible golden ticket in this drawer, but hey, just keep it in your wallet for a little bit longer, pal.
Well, isn't that why you're writing a graphic novel? Tell me what you're working on. What is it?
Well, so the pivot is because of how frustrated Hollywood is right now and the strike. So there's two things that I'm working on right now. One is this graphic novel called Enders that I co-created with this guy named Nathan Reed. And it's essentially about contract killers for the dead. It's about this guy named Ender Endless, and he's given a second chance. And what his job is after he dies, he's given a second chance by death, which is sort of just an entity. It's not a person, and it's not good or bad. Death is just like a construct. And so they go around and they end wayward souls, people whose souls refuse to leave Earth because they were wronged. Their lives were unjustly taken or whatever. So the job of the ender is to either satisfy the wayward soul by being possessed by it, taking them and being indebted by them and empowered. And then they go and they take care of the guy who unjustly killed them. Or if that soul festers too long on Earth, then they will manifest in flesh as monsters, like a horse monster, or whatever they can find.
Wow.
They have to end them that way.
That's
and
cool.
So they're ticking time bombs. These wayward souls are, and the whole point is like they got to keep Death's books clean. He doesn't care. She doesn't care if they go up or down river, whatever it is, just so long as there's not too many of them on Earth, because then a living death could happen where the dead rise, that kind of thing. So the story's not about a zombie apocalypse. It's just that's the White Walkers of the story. And so it follows Ender Endless and the discovery of like who he was, because he has no memories in his life. I think did you look at it or no?
I started to. I haven't had a chance to finish it, which is why I'm not commenting, because I just started it.
Thanks for setting it up, Frank.
Yeah, well, I did start it. This is, I'm very busy. I'm not going to give you my calling card after this.
I would throw it away anyway. No. But anyway, so it's horror. I love the tone of comic books because you get action and you get quippiness and you get funny stuff. But the modern indie books and the movement that comics have been in the last 30 years, the writing's gotten so much better. It's like TV quality writing that you get to do a lot with drama. So doing that, and we're talking to the artist Will Conrad, who's nominated for a Hugo for doing the Whedonverse stuff like Buffy and all that. And you and I have talked a lot about artists before, and we really like Will because my biggest thing is how well does the artist get their characters to act. Yeah. And he's a traditional style, but his characters are very expressive. And I love expression in comics because it's fun. So hopefully we can get Will. And then if that's the case, I've written the first 2 issues of that. I'm going to write 3 more on the contract I'm on. And then if it's successful, I'll probably write more of it because
you're doing individual issues. You're going to release those first. So very traditional in terms of 26 pages, 23.
We're doing basically the way Image does it because that's the publisher we want to approach. I mean, you did the first comic through Image, so they're a good creator owned. We'll get to keep the rights to it, and so the media rights to it. And so the idea would be to single issue publish the first 5 issues, that arc, and then the way Image works is they collect it as a trade paperback and then they turn around and sell it that way, and that's how they make their money. And that's the route we want to go, but we have to get an artist on board, be it Will or somebody else, and then we'll do the first 5 pages with the couple of scripts, and then we'll talk to publishers that way. We're not going to spend all the money on doing the art for all 5 books if we don't have a publisher.
Have you thought about doing Kickstarter? Because so many people have been doing Kickstarter successfully with comics, especially if you have a really talented artist.
That's the thing is that conversation will be had if we get someone the caliber of Will Conrad or not. I mean, he's got big social media following. He's been in the game for a lot of years. He's worked for DC, Marvel, everybody. Yeah,
a lot of those guys are on contract, so and they have work backed up for 6 months. So
that's the thing is we're waiting on him right now, schedule wise. So we'll see. But that part of that pivot is because I couldn't sell that in Hollywood if it wasn't a comic book first. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like it's too risk averse. So if you got original ideas, you got to go to a different medium. And it's the same reason I'm writing a novel now is because if I was to write that on spec, people are like, I'm not going to make this $120 million spec giant epic that's not based on anything. No way in hell. So I have to write it as a book.
But at the same time, it's also very deeply satisfying to write something and create something and have it be a thing, whether it's a book or a comic book. And, sure, if it turns into a movie, that's great. But when I wrote The Looking Glass Wars, I was like, okay, if this could just be a book, and certainly the first comic, will people even look at this? And once I got Ben Templesmith, I thought, people will see it, want to check it out because of Ben Templesmith. So it's similar to Hollywood, but the thing that I realized that was so satisfying is no matter what happened, I haven't made anything out of The Looking Glass Wars. It's been 20 years. And I don't care. I love the world and the sandbox I play in every day.
And that's kind of the thing for me is for the first time with the book, especially, it's just going to be me and the audience. You know what I mean? I mean, I have to get a publisher in place and all that kind of stuff. And that's the stage I'm at now with my reps. I'm putting the submission together. I've written the first 20,000 words, the first 5 chapters, and there's a prologue. And I've had the prose evaluated. It walks and talks like a book. It's done pretty well in terms of like the quality of the writing. But the thing that I'm excited about is it's not going to take 150 people and $600 million, like 6 episodes of television. It's not going to take, not even the input costs of a graphic novel, because people don't realize how expensive it can be to get the art done. You know,
I just wrote a blog today about my editor, and in the editor that I met 20 years ago, the year before Egmont in the UK published my book, and I was really struck by her editorial letter, which was incredibly extensive. Like, I'm telling you, she called herself she had the pruning pencil, and I mean, of all 358 pages, she had something on all of them. So it was completely daunting. And whenever I go to schools, I show some of the pages so that and it's the only time the English teachers get very excited, because I'm like, look at all of those little red comments are bad news for me.
but here's the thing about that is it goes back to that unicorn thing with me. Is like I assumed that the words that I read when I read Frank Herbert's Dune, what came from his mouth to the page. You know what I mean? Like, you don't think about the role that an editor has to get that there. And so that gave me confidence where I was like, oh, I don't have to be perfect. You know what I mean?
But you're talking about Frank Herbert. I mean, basically, all people named Frank that write are pretty natural and don't have to work that hard at it. It just
All
kind of
people named Curtis are donkeys. I get it. No, but you know what I'm saying? Like, the editor, that was empowering to me. The thought that I have somebody in my camp and by the way, their job, they're not trying to do what writers do when they read, which is, oh, this is what I would have done. They're trying to make it work.
Well, here's what she said. She said, this is your book. And if you don't want to take this on, don't take this on. These are really suggestions, but she was so smart in giving me ownership, at the same time having great editorial advice and ideas, but never losing the thread that this is your book. And because
it's way different than Hollywood, though, where
well, it's completely different, which is the whole point. What I'm saying is, so it's not just about, oh, I'm going to write a book so I can get a $150 million movie made. I'm writing a book because it's an amazing experience and it's mine. And no matter whatever happens, it comes from my mind and my imagination. And my God, if what you just said of your 20,000 words, that it walks and talks like a book, if that is true and it translates what was in your head to the reader and the reader tells you, that will blow your mind, because that's what happened with me. And then they dressed up as characters and then they got tattoos. And you're like, okay, how the fuck did that happen?
I have one character in here that if anybody gets a tattoo, I know exactly who it'll be, but I can't spoil that character because he's fun. But yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. Is like, it's the most fun writing in some ways that I've ever had, because I'm not really thinking about anyone other than myself. Whereas when you're writing for a comic, you're thinking of the artist. When you're writing for television or film, you're thinking about the executives and a million other things you don't want to be thinking about, but you have to. And so this is, in a weird way, I had this discussion with my friend Brian Hansen, he's got an MFA and he's directed movies and all this kind of stuff. And a great guy. And I was like, unpopular opinion, I actually think prose is easier than screenwriting. And he was like, you're out of your mind. And I was like, no, here's the thing is, you get to do all the jobs. You're sound design, you're the actor, you're the director, you're the writer. You get to write to all the senses. Like, the issue with screenwriting is people overwrite way too much because they're not used to the economy of words. It puts you in a box. It was liberating to do prose. Now, I'm not saying I'm great at it, but I had a great time doing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's because and also the way you can get yourself out of trouble and make scenes work is so much different because you have their thoughts. Whereas with, a screenplay, absolutely not. And then unless you're doing voiceover, and if a comic book, we don't do thought bubbles that much anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's a different experience.
Well, and, as you said earlier, all three are very different and all three require a different skill set. And I would imagine that when you finish this book and you're on your fourth book, you'll look back at that book and go, wow, I could have done such a better job because I certainly feel that way still. So, you're in the moment, you have the skill set that you have the imaginative power that you have, you create the thing, you put it out there, and you hope people, receive it in the way that, that you came up with it.
This one, just so I can say it out loud, because that's what I'm supposed to do on these things, right? It's called Paragons, but I don't know when it'll come out.
And you've written 20,000 pages. And tell us, is it
Yeah.
YA? Is it adult? It's
It's the older end of YA, so
okay.
it's like the as young as 14, as old as like 17
Oh,
era.
okay. So it's definitely YA. And
Yeah,
how many pages? What are you thinking? Word count?
it'll probably be close to 100,000 words. I know that a lot of YA is like 80, but a lot
80.
of science fiction, fantasy, you tax them on there because of the world building. So I'm shooting for somewhere between 80 and 100.
I say 80 is a very good mark. Just heads up. But
I mean, but I've also like we had a conversation about this book one of the times we caught up. I think like maybe during COVID or something like that. And I still take some of the things you said to me and have built them into how I'm building the world in terms of like the age of the protagonists and things like that, and making sure that all of the good stuff, quote, all the good stuff is in the first book, meaning like you only get one chance to hook them. So I'm trying to be as aware as I can be from a seasoned writer's perspective and knowing what I know in Hollywood. But to your point, this is the first time I've done this, so we'll see how it
yeah, and
goes.
it really it really falls. I mean, it really falls on the pros because with a script you can have somebody rewrite it. With comics, the art can be the thing that shines and people will buy it. But with prose, it's absolutely the words on the page.
I mean,
So
I wrote a test chapter because I was like concerned if I could even do it. I was
I
having
did
full,
that. You
huh?
did? I did that too.
Yeah, I did. I was having full blown imposter syndrome because again, screenwriting, that's what
Yeah.
I've done.
Yeah.
That's the thing I've done, and that translates pretty easily to comic books. But
Yeah.
prose is a different animal. And so I did the first chapter, and the feedback was, "What's going to happen next?" I was
Ah.
like, "Well, that's a sign that I should write what happened next."
Oh, that's
And that's
great.
kind of how it started.
Yeah. That's very funny because in my blog, my editor, she was saying to me that, "Oh, Frank, you've clearly done all of the research and you clearly have this whole world in your head. You clearly know what their backstory is. But the readers don't really care. They only want to know about what happens next." And I was like, okay, all right, that one stings a little bit,
That
but
was kind of like that City of Gods pilot that I wrote. There was so much like, check out all this cool shit in
yeah,
this world that I'm going to do. And then it was like, hey, man, that's exposition to a degree. Like, you
yeah,
don't tell them that till you get to that place that you
yeah,
need to tell them.
yeah. But I don't know. I thought that was a really cool world, so you might want to revisit that.
I've thought about it, but the thing that I got was like, oh, Greek mythology is a little dusty. That's the word they like to say, where it's like, well, it's been around so long. And then next thing you know, I'm forgetting his name right now. The guy who does Rick and Morty, Dan Harmon, is doing like a Greek gods
Yeah,
adult
yeah,
comedy. I'm like,
yeah.
oh, dusty comedy, huh?
Yeah, it depends on who's writing it. When Frank Scott did the Queen's Gambit and started with the young girl version for the entire pilot, and then cut to the star for the second episode, it was like a revelation. Oh, you can do that? I'm going to
Right.
revisit the Looking Glass Wars.
Right. Meanwhile, Alice starts when she's like, a kid, and then she becomes a teenager. And the part two of that, yeah, no, it tracks. I mean, I don't know, but the one thing I'll say about the transition from screenwriting to prose that I do think is somewhat beneficial, because you were the one who sent me Hunger Games,
Mm-hmm.
and Susan Collins is a screenwriter, and every single one of those chapters, cliffhanger like hell.
Great,
Right.
fantastic.
The pacing of that is like, and so of course you just find the reader just finds themselves reading the next chapter.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, I read the book in 3 days. Anytime someone tells you, oh, I read this book in 3 days, you think, oh, that's good. And so some of that is baked into, or I'm trying to, and hopefully it's successful, baking that into my style, where it's like, because of my screenwriting background,
Yeah.
cinematic, it's paced, it's got cliffhangers. If the prose is good enough, we'll find out, but it does have some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people describe my book, the people that liked it anyway. Some people did not, but that very cinematic and that the page turner quality of it, which was really important and which is something I focused on because, when you're with middle grade kids or young adults, certainly now that I have them, I see even more how important it is to engage them, but that it continues, and they feel that they need to know what happens next. What happens next, Dad? So
I'm My biggest concern with what I'm doing with this book is just that I may have aged it up too much, and so that's where I'll be curious to see what happens when we go to publishers if they say, "Hey, this is it's written a little too old." Like that's, you know what I mean. Not that it's written at it's written around like a seventh grade reading level, which is kind of the target reading level for casual prose, but just that like it's written like it's coming from the mind of like an adult too much. I'm a little worried about that part of it. That's the part where I'm like, am I going to actually appeal to those readers or not, like YA readers? Because if I can't, then I'm in trouble.
Well, yeah, you're going there. I mean, they're going. It depends on the vocabulary that you're choosing, but it's not knowable until you put it out there. So, I didn't know that there was children's publishers, YA publishers, middle grade publishers, which is why if I had known that, I wouldn't have had a 7-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 18-year-old in the same damn book. But it was the way that I saw the story, so I just thought I just wrote it, and I got passed on all over the place until Callie came along.
Yeah, but then you became a New York Times bestseller, so I guess it proves you correct.
Thanks to my editor. But I was reading in your bio, and now that folks know where you're from, this phraseology will make sense. That you spent your youth spun up in a tornado of comics, novels, films, television, and games. So, in terms of your style of writing, in terms of your choices of stories to tell, what were your like top influences, whether they were creators or the work that they created?
You mean because there's obviously like a lot of games that I played, but you're talking more like from literature, right? Like comics
No,
and books.
no, actually, I think the game part of it is really, really important and interesting. And when we started this conversation, it felt like you were deeply seated in games and interacting with your friends and starting your early seeds of creation through those gameplays. I mean, I think I've read somewhere that I know that you're a big fan of Dune and
Yeah,
Ender games, right? Because
Ender's Game. Yeah.
and I think you said you read a lot of fantasy like Philip K. Dick and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I read tons of sci-fi and fantasy. So, like, Ray Bradbury, and I read Dune and Neuromancer, and in fantasy, I read a bunch of like D&D novels and things like that, and Magic the Gathering novels. And so, I've read Asimov and Philip K. Dick, and like all the kind of things that you would expect to write. I really like or read. I really like this series called the Coldfire Trilogy by C.S. Friedman. That was a different take on fantasy because it was like human beings landed on another planet and our technology didn't work. So we were forced to go back to like a feudal situation, and there happened to be like this fey mana there. And I like that kind of setup. So those books really inspire me, but I read those when I was like a teenager. I was doing this stuff when I was 5. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So I have an older cousin named Travis. He's got a twin brother named Rob, and like they took me on an AD&D campaign at our cottage at Fife Lake, Michigan. I was like 8 years old. I had to beg him to do it. But it was like, it was like amazing. I was like, couldn't believe I got to make a character and they were in the story. My cousin was the one telling me the story. And so I think that John August, the writer, has the John August blog. He does the podcast with Craig Mazin. And I think somewhere at some point, I'm probably butchering this, but someone asked him about like, oh, my kid is interested in writing. Like, what should I do? Like, what's the best thing I could do? And his answer was like, haven't played Dungeons and Dragons. Because you are in charge of the story, but
Yeah.
it's interactive and it's also social. So your kid's not like alone, all the time. They're seeing, they have an audience in front of them to interact with. And so I played this, I played Dungeons and Dragons. I played Vampire the Masquerade. I played Werewolf the Apocalypse. I played Shadowrun, which is one of my the second version of that game is
right.
one of my personal favorites. Played other fantasy games like Harp. And then Magic the Gathering, which is a little bit like the Looking Glass Wars, because Magic the Gathering has elements of fantasy, elements of science fiction, elements of steampunk, elements of cyberpunk. It's big, broad worlds. It goes between different planes of existence. And so those were really like the big influences. And then in terms of comics, I grew up reading my older brother Peter's comics, and that was, God, did I get lucky? That was the Chris Claremont X-Men run, which is the Dark Phoenix saga and the Morlocks and all this kind of stuff. It's really when the X-Men became Charles Xavier is Martin Luther King, and Magneto is Malcolm X. Like that's kind of the equation for them. And then the mutants were oppressed. And so I got to read a bunch of that stuff, which really affected me. And these zany book like Gru the Wanderer and the Marvel What the books. And I read a bunch of really bad comics in the 90s. 90s were not a great time for comics to a degree. And that's where it all came from. It was all, I was on the farm alone, needed to go do some stuff. And then when I was with people, we were also doing story stuff.
So a serious nerdum coming out of farm life in Michigan, where you got inspired because, honestly, I don't think I mean, I didn't know that they had Magic of the Gathering novels, or if I probably have seen them at Comic Con and Dungeons and Dragon novels. But you're comparing those novels, or you were reading those with some of the great sci-fi writers of history.
I mean,
So
I'm not equating them as being as good. I'm just saying,
no,
like, I
but I
read
mean, but
DC
you
was
can
good.
go back and forth.
Yeah,
So that's a love of it. That's a love of the world creation aspect of it.
yeah. I mean, it's there. There's some great stories out there that like the Final Fantasy VII has this storyline that follows this character named Cloud Strife and this bad guy named Sephiroth. And I think I said that correctly. It's been a while, but it's this really crazy epic about like cloning and all of this kind of stuff. And when I was playing that game when I was like 10, 11 years old, whatever it was, that was like I've never seen this shit before. It was like
Right.
even though maybe there was a better version of that story somewhere else, it got to me through games.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so then you seek out maybe a better version of it, or or you look at like all the stuff that's being made in television now, and you can see all of these people were influenced by their childhoods in
Yeah.
the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And some of that is through gaming. I mean, look at how successful gaming movies have become now.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
So
finally, there's writers that understand how gamers see the worlds that they interact with and the gamification. They're finding ways
they
to.
made they made the Lego movie in the 90s, Barbie in the 90s. They made Super Mario Brothers in the 90s, and it was ridiculous. And apparently the actors were drunk the entire time because the script was so bad. So like it took a while for the industry to take those stories seriously. But honestly, moving forward, it's going to be a huge part of movies because the gaming industry makes more money than movies do. I mean, video games do. They're billion-dollar IPs.
Which is why I think Netflix is trying to get into the game business
Yeah.
and probably Amazon as well. But it's a different animal. I think they have a hard time. Again, it comes down to creators who have unique visions. I got to give it to Warner Brothers and Mattel for creating Barbie and letting Gerda run with that thing and making it her own and transforming the business. It's pretty remarkable to have that movie and Oppenheimer.
It's great because, well, the thing about Oppenheimer is like, you have to go see Christopher Nolan movies because, he's writer director and a lot of that stuff's original. I know Oppenheimer's based off of that, but like, I'll go see Inception. I'll go see any of these Christopher Nolan movies because it's creator owned. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like his original idea.
Yeah.
But with Barbie, what a bet. Like, what an absolute, like, set of something on that executive to do. And now, hopefully, they realize, like, not a bad way to do it. I mean, look at Lord and Miller, though. I mean, I think they were probably the only ones who had that take for the Lego movie. You know what I mean? Where at the end you find out it's the kid who's playing with the dad's Legos that were glued. It's just like, we all know that from when we were kids. Holy shit, you're telling me that's what's been going on the entire time? This has been a kid's mind? I've watched my son, who's 5 years old, play, and it's basically the Lego movie. Oh, well, this is doing this, and I made this guy into a monster, and yada, yada, yada. It's like, oh shit, that's the smartest take you ever could have had on that movie.
Right.
Yeah. It was perfect.
It was genius. Yeah. I love the new Spider-Man's Into the Spider-Verse. Those two movies as well. Those were expanding the Spider-Verse was really inspiring. And that's sort of something I wanted to just touch on a little bit because I'm looking to refresh and reset the Looking Glass Wars. And we had a lot of conversations about time travel and how time travel could play itself in this world. And I had kind of a template for the stories that I wanted to create first. And then the last two were with you with Crossfire and Underfire. And now that there's been a few years, I've started thinking about, time travel and the multiple dimensions and the multiverse and how I might be able to reintroduce Hatter through a portal that's not just into the time that he's living, but fractures off into different times, different storylines. And I think about this in terms of a new graphic novel series, which we can talk about, after we do this podcast. But I'm curious in terms of travel shows, time travel theory, time travel tropes, and how do you see time travel in fiction, in graphic novels or movies? I know that you did some work on some ideas that we had kicked around, and I liked some of the concepts you came up with. But what is your take on the way to use time travel to the most, beneficial and effective way in storytelling?
The answer is very carefully, because it's you need an absolute can of worms, and it
Yeah.
can do something to the stakes, which you see in the Marvel movies and things like that now, where suddenly what really matters.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to create a set of rules, in my opinion, when you do time travel. You have to create a set of rules that don't undermine your stakes, and you have to create a set of rules that when you're done with time travel, you're done with time travel.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's always there, nothing matters. And so you have to create, I guess this is a pun, like a moment in time in your world. But and it can be for 10, 15 years, whatever it is, but you have to know before you start how you're going to button it up correctly. Because nothing is worse than when time travel comes in. I'm not going to use this correctly, but I'm not trying to say jump the shark, but it kind of does that. You know what I mean? Like it can do a thing. Now, if done correctly, it's great. Like my favorite time travel thing is in Looper, when
Oh,
Bruce Willis is talking to Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He's like, I don't want to talk about fucking time travel. We're about here with abacuses and whiteboards. And like, that's the whole point. It's like the second you start to explain time travel, some nerd like me will be like, I don't think so. This actually doesn't work because of this, and this. And like, this is contradictory. Like, that's what's going to happen. And so you need to use it in a fun way where it's like, hey, we're doing time travel. Okay. And do it in a way where it's like, we're not doing this for forever. And the things that you've watched before this still matter, but we're doing time travel.
right.
Like, otherwise it's just like I remember I was watching Westworld. We watched the first season of Westworld, and like they just kept killing these people and they kept coming back. And I was like, well, why do we even care? And it's the same thing with the reason why they finally have stopped bringing Jean Grey back for a while in the X-Men is like, yeah, it was like, she's gonna die, but it doesn't matter, she's just gonna come back. And so it's like a soap opera that way. Or so and so was resurrected by a ghoul or something like that. So you have to be really, really careful with the way you do it, because your audience deserves that the things they read before still matter.
Yeah, which is why I like Quantum Leap in terms of that show, or Doctor Who, 12 Monkeys. I think all three of those did a really good job in terms of using the time travel device to keep the stakes fresh and allow an expansion of the story and a continuation. And then it's about how clever are you inside of the device of the time travel. So, and you came up with a lot of interesting ideas in terms of, we were working on a book. I was thinking about a fourth book, and I think we called it Lost in Time, and you had timekeepers and
Oh yeah,
you remember that?
the time stream and the time current and
Yeah,
like all this.
yeah. That
It
was
was
just,
like
yeah.
it was cool. Like the idea was, I think it was a little bit like pulling from like the White Rabbit and stuff like that on a stopwatch. The idea is that like Earth was one gear and Wonderland was another gear.
Yeah.
And we're thinking about maybe making a third plane of existence that could be another gear, and that time could be wound up and time could be wound back and that kind of thing. But are the realms all in sync that way? And we didn't have hard rules for it. It was just something we're talking about. I think those outlines that we worked on were only maybe a page for each book, real broad stuff. Real beady, broad.
I've also been thinking a lot about Wonderland, and how Wonderland has always represented Victorian England. But why is that? Why can't there be a Wonderland version for Asia or for China or for every country? That so you find yourself being given its imagination, and imagination is the power, and you're transferring it, transporting it to other people. So you create, based on Chinese myth and lore, a Wonderland version, and so you could travel to a time in history there and find a connection to that Alice, that version of Alice in Wonderland, so that it's not just time, it's also
Well, here's my pitch for you.
okay.
Looking Glass Wars, fractured fantasy, or something like that. Like, I get what you're saying though. It is very cool that way. They do Magic the Gathering does a little bit of that with the planes of existence that are there, because there's these planeswalker characters that exist across all the planes. But you're suggesting that there's like a different Alice in each one. It's not Alice going there. It's they have their Alice, they have their Hatter. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's very cool. It's a very, very big idea. I
Well, you
think that
just take one little story, and have our Hatter from Looking Glass Wars interact with who the character of Alice in, let's just for the sake of argument say it's China. Then you have a completely different cultural lens that you're seeing the story through, and a different set of influences and mythologies that you're tapping into. But it still comes down to that character and what that character's journey is and what those stakes are. And letting Hatter just stick his toe, interact with it, establishing that kind of cool concept, and then going from there.
from an art direction standpoint, that would be tons of fun. I mean, you would have just the imagery would be
Could be cool.
yeah, it'd be really cool. I mean, there's I mean a little bit we talk about with like there's a Spider Pig and there's the anime version of Spider-Man in Across the Spider-Verse where it's like they were raised in a different cultural sandbox, but yet they still have like their Uncle Ben origin story or something like that. So in our case, we would still have probably the Genevieve Red dynamic and Alice from there, like that kind of thing. It's cool. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big idea, but I'll tell you what, the way that it would be built if it was like a Marvel storyline, like one of their summer blockbusters, you'd have 8 issues where all of them collided. Like that's what they would build for, and then that would be them drive or test running that for like it to be like a storyline in the movies down the road or something like that. Because like Civil War, I have it on my shelf. They did Civil War, and then they did the movie version with Captain America that's different, but that worked really well for them. They're going to do House of M at some point, all of that stuff, and it's really about during the course of the year they have these different parts of the world like you're talking about, and then at one time they all slap together, and everybody buys the hell out of those comics because they're awesome.
Yeah,
So
so the idea would be to relaunch, thinking about how I could relaunch Hatter and some of the characters that he met in the graphic novel series, fully give them their a story arc, and then in the future writing stories about just them.
yeah.
But you and I also kicked around in terms of Crossfire Under Fire and Part 3, putting some of the conflict into the neighboring nations and wonder nations, so that there could be like a civil war, like a big story arc, because not everybody knows how expansive Wonder Nations is, because I focused on the three trilogies. I mean the trilogy with Wonderland, Borderland, and that's it. So we touched on a few others, and so that could be cool. And then you introduced all of those card soldier characters. By the way, where did you get the inspiration for a couple of those? You have some really great characters in there.
Well, we talked a little bit about G.I. Joe, but
Yeah.
honestly, it's a lot of it is I really viewed it like a game, right? So to me, it's a class system. In Dungeons and Dragons, there's knights, wizards, sorcerers, rogues, that kind of thing. So we have a pickpocket, we have an explosives expert, like that kind of thing. And then, a lot of times when you're dealing with like a Dirty Dozen type scenario, these people are only going to have, at least for the first story, sort of a dominant personality tick, because you're not going to get the underbelly of all of them. So we don't know why Gamble loves explosives. We don't know why Ingalls was in jail. We don't know why the character Rude that didn't make the team was a pickpocket. One of the things that we had talked about before this was like favorite characters that I made for your world, and Ovid is probably the one. But there's this guy named Yanish, who's like a linguistics expert in the House of Cards. Weirdly fascinated by that guy. No idea what he is. He's just a gag, a throwaway gag in the book. And I'm like, what if that guy's the hero of our story? What if that guy is the guy that goes to Morgovia and like gets the cultural norms, and he's the one who bows correctly and does all that kind of stuff, and he saves the day? Like, what if it's on Yanish?
That's funny that you say that, because there's two characters in, I think it's the Looking Glass Wars, two Wonderlanders. I don't know if they were milliners. I can't remember. It was so long ago, but they fell into the pool of tears and never to be heard from again. I was like, oh, I should write a story about those. I should.
Dude, what if they're Ben and Jerry? What if they're Ben and Jerry?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, where do they get the ideas for the ice creams? Well, because they're actually.
Yeah, I mean, probably the question I get the most is, who's King Arch in our world? And I've never answered that by design. So I get that question a lot. People want to know who's from Wonderland's here. So that's a whole other storyline that would be really fun to play with. So.
mean, it is relatively limitless. I mean, it's a massive sandbox. I think that there's a kind of a crushing weight that I'm sure you feel with that though, because like when you pick a direction, it's like turning a tanker ship. You know what I mean? Like you really got to know kind of where you want to go because one, you've got a fan base, and two, a lot's going to go with it if you want. You can bring all of this story and all of these characters, whether it's time travel, whether it's this civil war that we talked about. I mean, the third book, the Margavia book, I was like trying to find notes on what we were talking about, but essentially what this whole thing is in terms of the dissension with the suits that's happening
I
in
think we
under.
called it the Suit Wars. We wanted to call it the Suit Wars, right?
So I think the idea is that we're going to move into this situation where Alice, who's no longer a conjuring queen, has to deal with this uprising for the first time where she's not the queen on the chessboard. She's not all powerful. And then from that becomes what I think is the most interesting either past story or first story that we could do, which is what's it like when the suits aren't united?
Right.
We've kind of kept them in play because there was a conjuring queen, but ultimately you're left with a really, really awesome geopolitical issue. You have Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? You have the Iron Throne, that type of scenario. That excites me
Yeah,
quite a
yeah.
bit.
So if I think about it from that standpoint, it's so daunting. I'm going to implode. So that, which is why I'm wanting to expand, and I want to invite more people in the sandbox, and I want to kind of be the general and help with the direction. But to answer that question, the way to solve that is to get really granular, go really small, get real character, and find the character thread that is an elaborate you can elaborate on Hatter's journey and what he's going through, and maybe his daughter, and and what really was at stake for him, how deeply painful those 13 years of failure were, and see it, feel it, keep it more visceral. A lot of times I feel in the stories I've told or the way that I've told them that they're trying, there's a big canvas and there's lots of rules and lots of logic that has to get dealt with, and keeping it moving. And I like those things. I want to, but those are there now. Now I can drop into the touchy feely, personal, interior, internal stakes, and find ways to externalize those.
Yeah, I mean, there's Hatter specifically. I mean, he is sort of the fan favorite, right? That's kind of the person that he's the action figure you'd sell the most of. Um, and he is a really interesting character. He has like samurai qualities. There's an honor to him and all that kind of stuff. But also, we often play with this idea of him getting like angry or him losing his mind. Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
joke about the Mad Hatter
Yeah.
thing,
Mm-hmm.
making to his character. Like there's a lot, but like I don't know. I can't think of like the signature quiet Hatter moments. I guess Weaver, like stuff with her, like that kind of thing. So you could put him into really put him into choices that are not large scale life and death type situations if you didn't want to. I mean, that's kind of like what we did a little bit with that baseball thing though.
I think what I'm saying is the reason I like these parallel worlds is because if there's another little girl that is a surrogate for him, he can be doing something really good for somebody, but it also boomerangs back because it's what he's not doing for the person he's meant to protect. So I love that movie, Man on Fire. I love that movie, Man on Fire, and I love how they created, how Denzel's character was so broken, and
Yeah.
this little girl brought him back to life, to the full version, and I think that's what I'm getting at. Finding that in the stories. It doesn't have to be the entire story, but finding moments like that where he starts to break, go mad, and somebody for a greater purpose brings him out of it and puts him back on the right path.
Did he ever reach a point? I'm trying to remember now because there was the novels and then there was the 5 graphic novels. Like, did he ever actually give up hope? You know what I mean? Like, did he actually have like? Was there a period of time where he was just like
Oh
Alice
yeah.
is dead? And
Mm-hmm.
trying to
Yeah.
remember. Okay.
Yeah, but I want him to be in giving up hope, I want him to be a little bit more destructive and have a little bit more vices, human natural ways of of comforting himself. And also his storyline with his brother, which was not in the novels, is in the graphic novels, and that's also, a reflection of who he is and who he's not, and his expectation and his family, and then there's Genevieve and Red. So you have a sister story and a brother story, and that should come together at some point, and has a little bit in the second middle grade book that follows Ghosts in the Hatbox, because we start to see what broke up the sisters' relationship, and you see the connective tissue, and that's a really interesting dynamic, and which is why I like this time, playing with time and space, so that I can tell these multiple stories. I don't have to tell them linearly, not linearly. Jesus,
It's a hard
my
one.
God.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's so you want. I know you always liked the show like Kung Fu, like that kind of thing, or like they're out in the wild, like that kind of thing. You want to tell some bottle stories of Hatter, that kind of thing, or do you want to tell something?
yeah, I like that, but I don't think I would do it that way. I think I'd do it closer to Witcher.
Okay. Yeah.
Where you have multiple stories going on and you're not sure how they're connected. And then over time, you're like, oh, that girl is the adult there, and that's how they connect, and that's a different time. And that's the great thing about television and streamers, is that the flexibility is there to play and invent. And with the Looking Glass Wars, it's on multiple planes, it's multiple characters, multi-generational. So how do I utilize all those really interesting those conflicts between the characters, and give an expansive story, but in a small bite-sized drama.
Well, that's the difficult part, is condensing it down. I mean, it's you have to know kind of where it's placed inside of the broader world, then it drop into these little happenings here.
Yeah.
I mean, I just had thoughts about, breaking Hatter and stuff like that. Is like, what does Hatter look like as the antagonist? How does that happen? Like that's a whole, like, if you put him in another world and there's another girl missing and there's another Hatter, is there a world where our Hatter becomes the bad guy because he's so broken? You know what I mean?
Possible.
Like, that's interesting.
Well, certainly that happens when he meets his brother, and his brother is a reflection of that. His brother is that character. So,
Speaking of all these other characters, whatever happened with, I don't know if I can even, my instinct was to spell this to you, like my kids are listening for some reason, but whatever happened with Helia?
Oh, Helia. Oh, that's a very good question.
I don't want to tell the audience who she is if they don't know. I'm trying to think of what they know.
Well, the audience doesn't know, because it's a book that was not released, and it's a story that hasn't come out, and so I'm not opposed to talking about it. Basically, and that has a big time travel aspect of it as well, because basically it turns out that Red had a child that she thought she had lost in childbirth, that we are going to meet at 18. She does not know she's the heir to Red, and that if Hatter or Alice had never come back, she would be the heir and she would be ruling Wonderland. And at the same time that's happening, she's starting to come into these powers. And so it's her story of figuring out how can she send somebody back in time to kill or trap Hatter and Alice in our world, so the outcome of her life will be different.
It's the Terminator. She's trying to
Terminator. Yeah. So
Sarah Connor, this whole thing.
So So
I just didn't know what the fate of that was, because we worked on some of the time travel stuff, had her and this villain we created. I think his name was Junius or something like that. Like, there was some of that stuff, but I think I read a book.
Yeah, no, I finished the book. And I've been trying to decide, what to do with it. There's a lot of rewriting that has to go on. So, but yeah, it's a cool idea. I mean, you're taking
she's a great character,
antagonist, and turning her into a protagonist by the end, or at least you're showing the evolution and the reason why a character turns.
Well, she has one of those great antagonistic motivations where it's like, in her mind, she believes she's right, and to a degree,
she is right. She is right.
And so
Her mother was not a good person, but everybody's the hero of their own story, and she's the hero of her own story. So, okay,
she's the
so Curtis, thanks a lot for divulging and forcing me to divulge a storyline that I've been sitting on for a very long time. But because I haven't been rewriting it, you did me
This is me, George R. R. Martining you, like, get on it, Frank.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, by the way, you get to edit this. So whatever. If this makes the cut, then you wanted it to. Like now they're inside your mind. You're just going to make me look bad in the edit now because I brought this out.
Well, I'm definitely going to do that. No, this has been really, really fun. So tell me what you hope to do next. Obviously, I hear they're talking on the CEOs are talking, and Netflix is getting involved trying to resolve this strike. So fingers crossed that we'll be out there pitching and complaining about executives, but making stuff happen. In the meanwhile, I'm going to be working on some graphic novels. I know you are. Are you writing any television specs or pilots to be ready for when the strike's over?
I'm not. I'm focusing on the non-Hollywood stuff right now. I have 4 Hollywood projects that are all going to go back live again. So I have an adult animated comedy called Down Here that I have with this company called Mind Show. That was the one I was pitching to Amazon the day the strike happened.
Okay.
We'll finish up all those pitches. I have the hour-long drama set within the alt-right. I have a Hallmark Christmas pitch.
Oh.
Never thought I'd say that, but it doesn't have to be Hallmark. It could actually be. I won't pitch it here, but it's a fun idea.
But Hallmark is great because they produce a lot of movies. I have a lot of friends who they go in for the quick paycheck, and there's a quick turnaround. They have a set, what do you call it? They kind of template for what they want. If it's a holiday movie, they do a lot of holiday movies, so that makes sense. I mean, you got 2 kids, dude.
I know. Well, that's the other things I got to work. So. That, and then I have the crime drama as well, which we were already talking to investors and distributors with that to try to shoot back in Michigan. So I have all that stuff going on, but also the industry's so upside down right now that I don't really want to invest my time on something like that until I know what I'm looking at. So it's Enders. It's the graphic novel that hopefully we'll have packaged up and ready to go to publishers with the artist in tow, and I'll finish the other 3 remaining scripts. That'll be on the front burner, and then also the novel Paragons as well.
Okay.
I have there's a kids show that because I have children, I think everybody tries their hand at a kids show once they have kids. I have a kids show that I want to work on. I'm going to maybe work on with best man at my wedding, this guy Zach Webb. So that as well for more of the Hollywood side of things. But I want to try my hand at some of the non-Hollywood stuff, just because Hollywood is frustrating. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, like I said, you can, this stuff you can actually get it produced, and it's a thing, and you can share it, and it's deeply satisfying. And so it's, I find it really interesting, your childhood and how deeply seated your childhood and your experience in pop culture and how you've turned that into a job. I think a lot of folks who are artistic, whether it's, drawing or writing, and they're like your dad, like, you'll be back in 2 weeks. How do I make a living? And there's so many ways ultimately to make a living. And a lot of what this podcast has to say is about that. And when I say all things Alice, I think now is sort of, it's all things imagination. And Alice is a muse for all of us, many of us, and in some way or another. And if it's not, it's the curiosity and imagination that came out of Lewis Carroll to create such a character. And we're all just following, running, hoping to, create our own rabbit hole and our own wonderland. So
the thing with Alice in Wonderland is he kind of got there first. And so all the stuff that I was playing with and reading and all that kind of stuff, it's all influenced by Lewis Carroll. It's all influenced by the book from 1865 or whenever it was published. The entire fantasy genre, most of the children's genre was all changed forever by that book. I don't know if he did it first, but he made it popular.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, on that, thank you for coming on again, and we'll talk soon about some of the work stuff that we're doing.
Sounds good. I always love playing in the Looking Glass Wars. Thanks for having me, Frank.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man.